What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Let's Talk MMA podcast, and hope you guys are having a great one. Islam Makhachev just said that his fight with Jack Della Maddalena is most likely going to happen in November. There's no better fight to make right now for Madison Square Garden than that fight, the super fight between them two. And Khabib raised some interest in this matchup, saying that he believes JDM is the toughest opponent in Islam's career. Not only in the past, not only in the present, but also in the future. He thinks Islam's never going to fight someone as tough as JDM, which includes Ilia Topuria. Very interesting. And in that same interview, the guy asked Khabib about Ilia, like, wouldn't Ilia be the toughest opponent? And Khabib answered with JDM being bigger than Ilia. He's as good of a boxer. He's great at scrambles. He's a very tough fighter overall. And that's why he is actually concerned more with JDM than he is with Ilia. I mean, when Ilia was even brought up in the interview about how tough he could be, Khabib almost laughed at it, that it's not even that comparable. I do agree that JDM might be a tougher fight than Ilia. He is the bigger fighter. He is a very good striker. He can scramble well and defend takedowns. I don't think JDM's boxing is as good as Ilia's, but is definitely one of the best in the UFC currently. And I think enough to give Islam a very tough fight. And now, although JDM was able to defend Bilal's takedowns, Islam is a different style of a wrestler in totality. Like, Bilal has trained with Khabib. He's trained with Islam before, but most of his wrestling skills come from America. Like, that's where he learned to wrestle. That's where like 99% of his skills come from. And you definitely see a difference with the way he wrestles than the way Islam wrestles. And I do think Islam is going to take JDM to the ground at some point in the fight. Can he scramble with Islam better than Bilal? No. I think Islam is better on the ground overall than Bilal is. It's going to be more difficult to get up from the bottom and attack off his back and use all of those techniques that Craig Jones is coaching him to get this win over Islam Makhachev, right? This is going to be Craig Jones's third attempt at defeating Islam. But while he is getting better at understanding Islam's grappling, Islam is also getting better at understanding Craig Jones's coaching through his fighters. So as interesting as JDM versus Islam is, the grappling battle between Craig Jones and Islam in his camp is also very exciting. And we'll see. But I do think that Islam is eventually going to fight Ilia. He actually talked about it. He said there's a lot of hype for the fight and is being marketed the right way. He wants to fight Ilia for the #1 spot. Who is the best fighter in the UFC? He'll only be determined by the winner of that fight alone, or if one of them loses to someone else. Then the other guy jumps above him by default. But Khabib had a lot of takes, not only for that fight, but also for the Khamzat and Dricus fight. This one is very intriguing. So he said how he would advise Khamzat to fight Dricus, and it would not be through the wrestling, like a lot of us believe that Khamzat should win the fight through. He believes that Khamzat would outstrike Dricus and should approach it in that manner. Go out there and outstrike Dricus. He believes that Khamzat should enter into the fight striking with Dricus. I don't agree with that, but he believes that the heavy wrestling style in the first round is why Khamzat slows down later in the fight. He thinks Khamzat has better cardio for striking than he does for wrestling. He did point out Gilbert Burns as an example of him gassing out because he wrestled so heavy in the first round, as well as Kamaru Usman. The Usman fight, yes, right, he did wrestle a lot, but against Burns, he didn't. Against Burns, he actually struck a lot more, and because of how fast-paced that fight was, he started to slow down later in the fight. And we know that Dricus is going to bring a similar pace, a lot of pressure, while also being a bigger fighter than Gilbert Burns, causing that similar kind of chaotic striking pace. So it's an interesting take from Khabib, and I do agree with him that Khamzat has better form with his boxing. He has better fundamentals with his jab and right straight. He's good with his balance. He has his feet under him when he throws punches, whereas Dricus is like flopping around and even falling over at times. I just don't think throughout 5 rounds that Khamzat is going to outstrike Dricus. Now, if he does, if Khamzat listened to that interview and he takes Khabib's advice, outstrikes Dricus, then Khabib is just like the Yoda of MMA. I don't know. He's a genius. I just don't think that's how the fight goes. I think Khamzat wrestling in the first round would be the most effective way that he wins the fight. Dricus is so unbalanced and clumsy. And if Dricus is throwing some big overhand and he gets off balance, as he does sometimes, Khamzat can get under that punch and take him down even easier. And the thing about Dricus is he hasn't really fought that many wrestlers, right? I mean, to break down this, he fought Derek Brunson, he fought Robert Whittaker. No one even comes close to the level of Khamzat's wrestling. Khamzat may be the best wrestler we've ever seen in the middleweight division in terms of MMA. Of course, we have Romero who wrestled in the Olympics, but his wrestling didn't translate as well the way Khamzat's did. But very interesting take there from Khabib. He also said that he's not the greatest of all time. He believes that Jon Jones and Fedor are the 2 greatest of all time, but he leans more towards Fedor. There might be Russian bias in that. It's understandable why he would pick Jones, right? If you include Jones, he's most likely going to be #1. He said about himself, though, that he's probably in the top 10, if not top 15, which is a very humble answer, and I think a lot of people do agree with that. I think Khabib is in the top 10, and the reason why he's not higher is because he retired very early, right? He could have fought Charles Oliveira, he could have fought Michael Chandler, a rematch with Dustin or Justin Gaethje, and then fight Arman Tsaruykan. Islam rises to the top, and Khabib goes up to the welterweight division and fights Leon Edwards. I agree with Khabib that he's not the GOAT, but I do think he had the abilities to become the GOAT if he fought long enough, because I don't see a single lightweight in history that would have beaten him. I don't think Charles would have beaten him. Arman, Chandler, a rematch with Dustin or Justin, Max Holloway, even him going up to welterweight, like who would have beaten him at the time? Usman was out of his prime. Leon would have gotten destroyed by Khabib. He wouldn't have fought Bilal, and JDM came way later. So imagine the win streak if he didn't retire at that moment. He would have beaten Charles, Chandler, Dustin rematch, moves up, and fights Leon Edwards. You could say he's the GOAT at that point, especially if he dominated all of those guys the way he did for most of his career. And there was something interesting that Daniel Cormier said. Now, DC is part of his camp. He's going to be biased for Khabib. He believes Khabib is the greatest of all time. I don't agree with him in that, but he did bring up a very good point about Khabib. In the last fights of his career, he was only getting better. He was beating these guys even faster. And his last 4 wins were all finishes, even though those were the best fighters he went up against. He went to decisions against fighters lesser than them. But when he fought the best, he was finishing them and finishing them faster. He beat Dustin Poirier. He beat Justin Gaethje faster than he beat Conor and Ilia Topuria and Edson Barboza and Michael Johnson. Even though the opponents were getting more difficult, he was also getting better at the same time. So much better that he was beating them even faster, right? Against Ilia Topuria, he went 5 rounds to a decision with him. He went to a 3-round decision with Edson Barboza in a very favorable matchup for him. He finished Michael Johnson in the 3rd round, but after Conor, he finished Dustin in the 3rd, and he finished Gaethje in the 2nd. When's the last time Khabib has had a 2nd round finish against anybody? Daryl Horcher, and Horcher is not near the fighter that Justin Gaethje is. Now, the only thing about that fight with Gaethje was that Gaethje won the 1st round, but the Khabib that fought Dustin and Justin was a Khabib that was improving, and that's a fantastic point from Daniel Cormier. I think if he fought Charles and he fought Chandler after, he would have been even better against them. And Charles would have never became champion if Khabib stuck around, shifting the timeline of the lightweight division from what we know of it today. Imagine a lightweight division where Charles never became champion, Chandler didn't fight him for the title, perhaps Charles versus Dustin and Justin wouldn't have happened at the time that they did, as Khabib moves up to welterweight for his friend to reign, and therefore he fights Leon Edwards for the welterweight title. But very interesting takes from Khabib regarding some of these fights and who the greatest of all time is. You guys see Tom Aspinall and Michael Chandler going back and forth? So Chandler was not happy that Aspinall said that he has quote-unquote bad fight IQ. And he said that it's mad for someone who has that many fights to still be fighting the way he does. And it's why he picked Paddy Pimblett to beat Chandler, even though a lot of people thought that Chandler was going to be a tough fight for Paddy. That's what Chandler got upset about. And he said, didn't this goober say this like 3 years ago? And then waited as long for Jon as I did for Conor after he criticized me for waiting for Conor. Cool, unquote. What does he mean that Aspinall waiting for Jones was the same thing as him waiting for Conor? Conor wasn't the champion. Jones was. Tom Aspinall wanted to fight the champion because he had the interim belt. Chandler was just some guy doing what Conor told him to do. You guys were not the same. And yes, Tom Aspinall is 100% right about Chandler's fight IQ. Like, I don't know how Michael Chandler can watch his fights and think he's fighting intelligently. Does he like imagine he's fighting like GSP out there? Like he's stringing combinations from striking to wrestling the way Demetrius Johnson does? There's no way he sees himself flailing his arms around to try to knock his opponent out full blast and everything he throws, nearly falling over, and thinks that's high fight IQ. Bro, come on. This is like Chandler's thing. Like, he has insane attributes. He is well-rounded, but he has some of the lowest fight IQ to balance all of that. Because if he had like GSP fight IQ, he would be the champion. I don't know if anybody would beat him, but there has to be a balance, right? So while his physicality and his skills are all top-notch, he's got to have low fight IQ. I mean, he has to, right? What Tom Aspinall said is something that everybody agrees with. Everybody says Michael Chandler has low fight IQ. And I don't know how he doesn't think that. Like, bro, you could just watch your fights, right? Like, it's definitely lower than average fight IQ. Like, Bobby Green has higher fight IQ than him. Drew Dober has higher fight IQ than him. Like, these guys have average fight IQs. Imagine being able to strike and wrestle very well, but fight the way Chandler does. Drew Dober and Bobby Green are strikers. They don't have the wrestling that Chandler does, you know? Chandler's literally arguing against that water is wet. Water is wet. Fire burn, and I will beat Michael Bisping. You guys see this insane fight night card this weekend? It was supposed to be Tatsuro Taira versus Amir Albazi. Albazi pulled out, and replacing him is Park Young-sung, who's not even ranked in the flyweight division. He's a very good fighter, undefeated, but most people could be looking at these fighters and think who versus who. Man, it's really only Abu Dhabi and China that they stack these fight night cards. Matusz Rebecki versus Chris Duncan is a good fight. Esteban Ribovic is on the card. He's going up against Elvis Brenner. Neil Magny versus Zaleski dos Santos. Danny Silva versus Kevin Vallejos might actually be the best fight on the entire card, though. I would say Rita Nakamura, but he fumbled that last performance. Adolfo Vieira versus Trishan Gore is a good fight. You know a card's lacking when Neil Magny is the most famous fighter on the card. But it might perform well, actually. Sometimes these cards, you know, some of these guys might be like future ranked fighters and stuff like that. But yeah, it seems like a normal fight night card now. And it doesn't just stop with that card. The one after is Roman Dolidze versus Anthony Hernandez. Then Alex Perez versus Steve Erceg. Those are two good fights. And it falls off like a brick after. And honestly, the main interest in this entire fight night card is the rise of Anthony Hernandez. He is widely thought to be a future contender of the middleweight division. But can you imagine if he loses to Dolidze? That'll be horrible for the division because we need guys like Hernandez at the top. Dolidze's never going to be a contender. He's never going to reach the top of the weight class. He is essentially the new gatekeeper at middleweight. And that is going to be the test for Hernandez. Can he get past someone on the level of Dolidze? I think so, but we'll see. But Alex Perez versus Steve Erceg might actually be the best fight on the card. And then after that is UFC 319, and this card is great. The fight night card after is actually pretty good. I think the main event is lacking, but the rest of it is better. So the main event is Johnny Walker versus Zhang Mingyang. And of course, the reason why it's the main event is because it's in China. Mingyang is the next big Chinese star. He's going to destroy Johnny Walker most likely. It makes sense business-wise why the co-main event is not actually the main event. The co-main is Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling. Realistically, that is a lot more of an important fight. They're higher ranked, they're better fighters, they have more legacy. Besides for the Chinese audience, this is actually the main event. Then you have Sergey Pavlovich versus Waldo Cortez Acosta. Great fight. Marco Tulio versus Michel Pereira. Another great fight. Uran Salibaliev versus Diar Nurgozai. Decent fight. Lonnie Kavanaugh versus Charles Johnson. Great fight. That's a good fight night card right there. Oh, did you guys see that the commission for the Mansour Abdul Malik and Cody Brundage fight actually overturned their fight? It is one of the few times the commission has actually retracted the original result. This is very rare. This does not normally happen. So the commission in Georgia, shout out to Georgia, man, because we know Nevada never would have done this. They overturned the result from a technical decision win for Abdul Malik to a draw. Now, the reason why they made it a draw is because they said it was unfair to score an incomplete third round for Abdul Malik. Finally, one of the commissions actually doing something right. Now we need to change some refs. We need to change some judges. All the judges, actually. We need to bring in soccer kicks and ground and knees, and open scoring is debatable, but there's a lot of other stuff they need to still do. But at least this is a step in the right direction. Actually overturn some of these fights. There's no reason Mansour Abdul Malik should win a technical decision scoring an incomplete third round because he finished the fight by headbutting his opponent. If anything, that could be a disqualification. But at the very least, they took away the scoring of the third round. So now that is not going to be a loss for Cody Brundage. So really cool stuff there. And Petr Yan, off of his win against McGee, said that he is not interested to fight with Umar Nurmagomedov. This is what he said, quote, "I think it would be disrespectful. I've won 3 fights in a row. I believe Umar also has to do some work. You have to win a couple times to be in the mix for a title shot. I was offered a 5-round fight against Umar in Azerbaijan, which I accepted, but then they were not ready. They will only be ready in October. I'm only interested in the winner of Merab versus Corey," unquote. I think it's fair. I think Yan should get a title shot next. I think Umar needs more than just 1 win. I think he needs at least 2 wins to fight for a title again. Yan just won 3 fights in a row against 3 good fighters, especially the first 2 against Song Yadong and Davison Figueiredo. And if it is true that Yan accepted the fight in Azerbaijan and Umar didn't, as they were both offered the fight, at least Yan gave him a chance, I guess. But I don't know exactly why Umar couldn't fight. I think it might have to do with the hand injury. But it is reported that he is going to be fighting Mario Batista. So Umar versus Batista is a great fight. And then I think Yan, just like he said, should wait for the winner of Merab versus Corey. Right? If you're on a 3-fight win streak and 2 of those guys include Song Yadong and Davison Figueiredo, you get a win after them 2, you absolutely deserve a title shot. The only thing that creates disinterest in this is that Yan got dominated by Merab before. But that has nothing to do with who deserves a title shot, right? If he actually earned it, he beat the guys he needed to beat, he's on a good win streak, then he has earned that title shot, and that is what's most important. And Ilia says that he would rather relinquish his belt than fight Arman Tsaruykan. It's never great to hear a champion say that they're not going to fight the number 1 contender, and they'll rather vacate their belt than fight that guy. Arman is the number 1 contender, and he is the toughest fight in the division for him. But fighters and fans don't have the same interest all the time. There are a lot of fans that want to see him fight Paddy Pimblett, but there's also a lot of fans that want to see him fight the number 1 contender. He is having his best interests in mind, right? He wants the easiest fight that brings in the most money, and that would be a fight with Paddy Pimblett. But it does make a lot of people think that he is ducking Arman Tsaruykan. This isn't the first time he said he wouldn't fight Arman. He said it before as well. He might just be waiting for Arman to fight someone else first, right? Because Arman could pull out again, and he wants to see him fight someone else, and if he wins, then he gets a title shot. And that's what Dana wants too. Dana wants Arman to fight someone else. I think it should be Justin Gaethje versus Ilia Topuria, and then do Arman Tsaruykan versus Paddy Pimblett. Winner gets a title shot. Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira. I think those are the best fights to have if Arman's not fighting Ilia. I don't blame Ilia for wanting to fight Paddy. Easy fight, brings more money. Of course he should want that fight, but as a fan, I don't care as much about that fight. I want to see the best fight the best. and that is Ilia versus Arman. And Michael Bisping and Paul Felder were talking about this. They also say that Ilia should fight whoever the number one contender is, and he shouldn't be turning down any opponents as a champion. So this is what Felder said, quote, "I mean the guy is the number one contender, and to say that you would rather relinquish the belt than fight him is, come on man, we're getting a little carried away. In this generation of fighters, when they get to the top position, they're so willing to jump around weight classes and try to deny fighting guys. That's not how it works. If you're the best, and he's on your level and all this kind of stuff, then prove it. Just go out there and prove it." I hate that. I saw his comments and I was like, come on, man. Here we go again. We got a champion that's just looking for the biggest thing. Look, the UFC is not going to try to put you in a position that's not going to be a big thing. And I think you're getting to a position, Ilia, where you are the thing. You don't need another guy to necessarily be the thing. You're the guy that people want to see, unquote. I agree with Paul Felder. Ilia doesn't need Patty. Ilia doesn't need a specific opponent to make his fight big. He is the A-side to his fights, although the Patty Pimblett fight will make it a bigger fight than Arman Tsaruykan. Just because Patty will talk a lot more, he'll play it up in the press conferences more and stuff. The fight is not as good, but a lot of the casual fans, they like the theatrics of it. They like the WWE element of it, and that's what Patty Pimblett would bring to it. So I think it should be Ilia versus Arman. They could fight at the end of the year, early next year. Ilia doesn't fight that often. He averages like less than 2 fights a year. He fought once this year so far, 2 fights last year, 1 fight in 2023, 2 fights in 2022, and 1 fight in 2021, 2 in 2020. It seems like he averages like 1.5 fights a year. And Arman can beat him, man. Arman could win that fight. It's honestly the only fight in this division that is competitive for Ilia. Nobody else has given Ilia a good fight, where he's yet to fight a great wrestler. Arman would be by far the best wrestler he's ever went up against. And honestly, it's good experience going into an Islam fight if he wins. If he beats Arman, that would get him more ready to fight someone like Islam, because going from like Bryce Mitchell to fighting Islam Makhachev is a huge difference in grappling, because so far the best grappler he fought that shot a takedown was Bryce Mitchell. It would be a lot better if he fights Arman, beats him, then he would be a lot better prepared to fight Islam Makhachev. So I hope they make that fight at some point, whether it's his next fight or a fight later. I want to see Ilia versus Arman, because until they fight each other, it's never going to be number one versus number two. And with that, let's go to the questions. We're going to start with Troy Hartung. A few questions about Michael Johnson. What'd you think of Michael Johnson's performance against Zell Huber? The speed in his hands looked almost identical to the MJ that fought Gaethje and Dustin. And he seems like catching a second win late in his career, almost like from what we saw with Jim Miller recently. He had a great performance, but the hand speed was the most surprising thing there, because Zell Huber is supposed to be the next generation of fighter. It does put into question whether the next generations are actually better than the previous ones. But with this fight specifically, I think it has more so to do with the styles, because Zell Huber is not a great puncher. He's not a great boxer. And if Johnson still has that speed to enter with quick 2-punch combinations, he could give Zell Huber a tough fight. I just didn't think Michael Johnson would be as fast as he was. Right? Speed is usually one of the first things to leave a fighter. He is a better boxer than Zell Huber. He fought an intelligent fight. I'm not going to say he has a second win though, because Zell Huber is not on the level of Gaethje and Dustin, right? Michael Johnson was around that level in his prime. He beat Dustin Poirier. He almost beat Justin Gaethje. He was top 5 in the lightweight division when Khabib fought him. Michael Johnson in his prime was actually a very good fighter. So I'm not going to say it's a second win in his career, because a second win would mean that he has returned to that level, right? And I don't think he has. I think his decline isn't as drastic as we originally thought, right? Him and Jim Miller, they have declined gradually, like slowly throughout their careers, but they're still going to be good enough to beat some of these next generation fighters. And then your second question, how realistic is his path to gain back into the top 15? And what would be the best fights for him to take where he would have the best chance to gain back into the rankings? Maybe Bobby Green and then either Grant Dawson or Moicano. So with the win against Zell Huber, he is going to be somewhere just outside the rankings. I think he would be in the top 20 because Zell Huber would be. Yeah, I can see him actually getting some of those fights and winning. Fights Bobby Green, I think he would beat him. Then fights Grant Dawson. He could beat Dawson if he could defend the takedowns. And I don't think he beats Moicano. But if he were to have beat Dawson, then yes, he would be ranked again. Let me see though. There's Yoel Alvarez. I don't think he beats Alvarez. Dawson, BSD. He could win against BSD though. He has no defense for the hand speed of Johnson. I think though that's a tougher fight than Grant Dawson. Michael Chandler is a tougher fight than Grant Dawson. Then is Moicano. So I think his best chance of entering into the rankings is by beating Dawson. And I think he could do it. And then your third question, is there any particular fights that you would want to see from MJ if he continues to perform well and gets into the rankings? Few that come to mind would be Fiziev, Max, Hooker, the Gaethje rematch, or maybe Conor if he returns in a serious manner. And considering Max, Conor, and Gaethje might not all have the chins that they used to, I think MJ could hurt them bad if he times a good overhand or straight punch on any of them. I think a fight with Conor would be interesting, but I think Michael Johnson gets destroyed by those other guys. Can you imagine Michael Johnson fights Conor McGregor and wins? He will have that win forever, that he beat Conor McGregor. The guys he would have beaten throughout his career would have been insane if he gets a win over Conor. Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, wild, but he does not beat Fiziev, Max, Hooker, or Gaethje. The only way the Gaethje fight would be good is if Gaethje's washed, right? Like, he gets knocked out and just is washed after. Then he could fight Michael Johnson. Then it would be a good fight. But as of right now, no. All 4 of those guys destroy Michael Johnson. But the one I would like to see the most, I think the counter fight would be interesting. The other one would be Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler versus Michael Johnson. Power versus speed. That would be an insane fight. I can see Johnson winning just because of how reckless Chandler is. And Johnson has a higher fight IQ. Both guys are not in their prime anymore. That would be the fight I want to see. But they do train together, so they might never fight. And then we're going to Sushan Tikop. Do you think the BMF belt should be introduced in other weight classes just to keep the fighters motivated to get some kind of validation? It is a notion that when the title is on the line, more people tend to see the fights. What is your opinion on that? Yeah, it would create more validation, and I guess with a title on the line, more fans would be interested just in general, especially the casual fans. They just see a belt. They're like, oh, it has to be important. But if you give a BMF belt to every weight class, you're starting to turn it into boxing, right? At what point then they're going to add a third? The BMF title, I don't even think should be a thing anymore. It's like a second place belt. It's the fighters that couldn't win the belt in their weight class. The BMF champion is the guy that couldn't win the actual belt in their weight class. I mean, think about it. Jorge Masvidal, he fought for a title and lost. Dustin, Justin, Max, all in lightweight. None of them became champions. 2 of them tried, and they lost multiple times, right? Justin fought twice for the belt. Dustin 3 times for the belt, and they lost all of those. But they both became BMF champions. We'll see with Max, right? If Max actually becomes the undisputed lightweight champion, he will be the first BMF champion to also be the lightweight champion. If you don't count the illegitimate claim that Ilia Topuria is actually the BMF champion, as he says, right? He believes he's actually the champion of that. I don't know why he cares so much about that belt. He cares more about that belt than any other champion. Like, look at Islam. When they even mention that belt to Islam, he just like laughs at it. But regarding the interest of the BMF belt, it does have another benefit to it. The fight gets treated as a championship fight. And if I'm not wrong, they get pay-per-view points for it, right? They get actually paid like it is a championship fight. So it is actually good for the fighters monetarily to fight for that belt. But then your second question. Most fighters, when asked on their fight week about the GOAT, tends to take Jon Jones' name. He failed multiple drug tests and is still perceived as the greatest ever to do it, which sets a bad example for upcoming fighters or new fans of the sport. What do you think about this Jones bias? Yeah, they're excluding the whole steroid thing, and I don't think most other sports do that. But in MMA, where steroid consumption is at its most dangerous because you're punching someone in the face, not dribbling a basketball, you can still be the GOAT in this sport. Now, without the steroids, Jones is, of course, still a very good fighter. Like, he still would have beaten some good fighters, but it helps with your training, helps with recovery, makes you stronger. It puts the opponent in a disadvantage when both of them can't do it. Like, if they eliminated drug testing, then I don't think people even care, right? Because everybody could do it. It's the unfairness that I think the fans mostly care about. Because Jones did fight during an era where the drug testing was a lot more lenient. But then he fought guys like Vitor, and he fought fighters that might have been on stuff too. But when USADA came in, he tested positive multiple times. And that's where Jones gets a lot of criticism. His DC rematch was arguably like the most prestigious fight in his career, where DC was champion. And he took steroids to beat him. I know some people say that Jones didn't need to do steroids to beat DC. Then what is the purpose of him taking steroids for that fight? He obviously used roids to win. Who knows if Jones has the same confidence without it, right? For the fights that he didn't test positive, his performances were not that great. During USADA, Jones's best performances were against DC and the second Gus fight. In both of those, he tested positive. In all the fights where he didn't test positive, OSP, Smith, Santos, and Reyes, his performances were a lot more lackluster. He was a lot better when he fought DC and Gus. He fought Alexander Gustafsson, a rival of his, where a lot of people believed that Gustafsson defeated Jones before, and he tested positive for that fight too. It can make someone believe that Jones took steroids for that fight because of how close the first fight was. He didn't want it to be close. He couldn't go through a fight like that with Gustafsson again without some extra help, right? Wild. And that whole event was moved too, just so Jones can fight. And then your third question, early predictions for JDM versus Islam. Do you see a finish in that fight? I got Islam by 3rd round submission. Keep up the great work, brother. Much appreciated. Thank you so much for the question, man. And then we'll go to Dope Slicer. Why does the MMA community, including you, label Gaethje as untechnical while praising Poirier as one of the sport's best boxers? Gaethje outboxed him in the rematch and KO'd him off a setup from the boxing. Since the first Poirier loss, Gaethje has clearly refined his technique and outstruck Prime Barboza, Prime Ferguson, Prime Chandler, Fiziev, etc. Yet he's still dismissed as just a brawler. Love your content as always. Thank you so much, man. And yeah, I think the reason why Gaethje is seen as untechnical is because I think his striking style is more unusual with the way he throws punches and the way he moves, and sometimes he ducks his head, looks at the ground, and throws overhands, and it looks very different than the way Ilia Topuria fights. Ilia Topuria is the image people have of what a technical striker looks like, right? Or Fiziev, who Gaethje beat, right? Fiziev looks like the better striker, but Gaethje outstruck him twice. It's just these fighters that have this unusual style that doesn't really follow that formula of what a fundamental striker looks like. Like, look at the way Gaethje throws his hooks. It's like he's slapping with them. There's not a big arc of the arm when he throws it. All of his hooks are slapping, and a lot of times it's like he's hitting him with the palm side of his fist. Sometimes he jabs over his own knees, like he's leaning into it. In the moments he brawls, he does get a lot more untechnical in those exchanges compared to his neutral fighting in the center of the octagon where he's entering with a jab and then intercepting him with hooks and landing the leg kicks and stuff. He looks a lot more technical there. He has an excellent jab. He has very good leg kicks. His timing on some of his hooks are excellent. His ability to adjust in the fight with the uppercuts against a Rafael Fiziev level of striker is very impressive, and the shots he was landing on Dustin, I think that rematch with Dustin confirmed that Gaethje is a high-level striker. Dustin was the best striker he fought, and he lost to him before. By beating him in the rematch, using only his striking, that legitimizes Gaethje's skill. Like, he is actually a very high-level striker. Really does throw out a lot of doubt of how good Gaethje's striking is, because 2 fights later, Dustin gave Islam Makhachev a very tough fight. Striking looked excellent in there. So great question. And then go to Harley. If Daniel Cormier could have gotten strict and made a cut to middleweight during his prime, how well do you think he would have done, let's say from 2013 to 2018? Can you imagine shredded Daniel Cormier in the middleweight division? His cardio could be different, his strength could be different, the fighters would be faster, right? Fat fighters still can have good cardio, they have the energy to burn. There are some fat guys like Martin Buday. The guy has good cardio compared to the other heavyweights. But let's say DC has that 5-round cardio, fighting the middleweights from essentially Chris Weidman's era to the beginning of Adesanya's. Firstly, who do I think would beat him? Luke Rockhold would have been a tough fight, but they never would have fought each other. Weidman would have been a tough fight too. He would have destroyed Michael Bisping. I think he would have beaten Yoel Romero and Jacare Souza. Whitaker would have been a tough fight, right? Prime Whitaker. The takedown defense, he had better striking, faster. I could see DC still winning it, but that's a very close stylistic fight. He would have destroyed Adesanya. Adesanya would not have stood a chance against him. He would have beaten GSP. But if he was able to win the belt from 2013, let's say he beats Chris Weidman, and then holds the belt all the way to beating Adesanya, like look who his next opponents would have been. Marvin Vettori, Jared Cannonier, Paulo Costa. He would have annihilated those guys. If he gets to Adesanya, he retires on top, nobody beats him. It would be up to Robert Whitaker, Chris Weidman, and Luke Rockhold to beat Daniel Cormier. And I think they could. It would be up to those 3 to beat DC. Man, DC would have been a monster at middleweight. You just had to put down all those donuts, man. They would have Hawk Rock. Have you forgiven yourself yet for hyping up Patchy Mix to be the next big thing, but having him look like a wet towel instead? Wait, what do you mean? Patchy Mix is going to be the next champion, all while looking like a walking statue. But he might be fighting again, so we'll see if those are just octagon jitters or the Bellator fighters really are B tier. They're going to fire mixtape. If Aspinall absolutely walks through Gunn like I suspect he will in October, is there anyone in the UFC who can give him a challenge? I think Almeida can pose an interesting challenge on the ground, and of course Jones could be a challenge. Is there anyone in light heavyweight who could possibly beat him? We've seen lighter man skill be a deciding factor in a good amount of fights recently, so how does Tom do against the top light heavyweights? Currently in the UFC's heavyweight division, there is nobody that can give Aspinall a good challenge. I think Almeida might be the most difficult fight because he can grapple. He's fast for a heavyweight and he is getting better with his striking, so he does have some things going for him, but do you know who it is up to give Aspinall a real challenge? It's Francis Ngannou. That's it. That's the fight the heavyweight division needs. Tom Aspinall versus Francis Ngannou, the man who never lost his belt. Right? Still some people believe that Ngannou is actually the real heavyweight champion, and it makes sense. He never lost his belt. The heavyweight division has been absolute garbage ever since. And that's the fight to make. As for light heavyweight, no. I think Magomed Ankalaev could give him a good challenge. Alex Pereira, if he defends the takedowns, could. But I think Ankalaev would be an interesting fight. I still think Tom wins. I think he beats Alex. I think he beats Yuri and Olberg and all the other top guys at light heavyweight. They're going to Prince Malcolm. How much damage did Tony do to his legacy with his 8-fight losing streak? Do you think people will ever remember Prime Tony again? Or do you think he'll be seen as BJ Penn 2.0? He won't be as respected as BJ Penn. Not necessarily only because of the losses, but because BJ Penn is the pioneer of the lightweight division. He was the trailblazer for the lightweights. The thing that Tony had in his prime was that he was the best lightweight in the world with Khabib, right? That was the thing. That's why everybody wanted to see the fight. He had the longest win streak at the time in lightweight history, tied with Khabib. They were the 2 best in the world for years, and the fight never happened. Tony should have retired a long time ago. Anderson did it as well. Anderson fought for way too long. Same with BJ Penn and Renan Barao and so many fighters. They just don't know when to retire, and they destroy their own legacies for it. If Tony just retired after the Beneil Dariush fight, his legacy would look so much better. I mean, yeah, 3-fight loss streak, but there's been so many fighters with 3-fight loss streaks. Nobody's lost 8 fights in a row, though. That's what he beat everybody at, because he kept fighting. He went from a rivalry with Khabib as the best lightweight in the world to losing to Bobby Green. Do you know what Prime Tony would have done to Bobby Green? And then he got submitted by him, choked unconscious, when he should have been retired long before that. So yes, I think most fans, especially those who never watched Tony's fights live, will remember him for the loss streak above everything else he's accomplished. Because that is the most significant thing he's done in his career. It's not just a loss streak. He has the longest loss streak in UFC history. Nobody's lost more than he has in a row. But for all of us who watched Tony's fights live, we know how good of a fighter he was. In his prime, he was one of the very best in the world. But Tony was such a different fighter. A fighter with endless cardio, with an unshakable confidence, and very physically gifted to fight. He was athletic, he had a granite chin, a long reach for the division, and never gassed out. Was fighting at high elevation against RDA for 5 rounds and put a pace on him. Tony Ferguson was so exciting in there and menacing to his opponents. When you entered the octagon with prime Tony, you had to leave everything you had in there because you're most likely not coming out of that octagon the same way you went in there. But the thing about Tony was, his decline was always going to be disastrous because he wasn't a fighter who relied on the fundamentals, who relied necessarily on his technique. As soon as the athleticism declined, the speed slows down, the chin gets less durable, Tony would have to rely on his technique there, which is something he wasn't that great at, compared to the other fighters at the top. And I believe that's what you saw in the Anthony Pettis fight, and a decline all the way to the end of his career. But his career was filled with a lot of what-ifs. What if Tony fought Khabib the first time they were matched up? Or the 5th time? What if Tony didn't injure himself that took him out of his prime? What if Tony waited for Khabib instead of fighting Justin Gaethje? What if he didn't cut weight twice against Gaethje? What if Tony wasn't unfairly stripped of his title? What if Tony fought Conor McGregor? What if Tony retired after fighting Dariush? He was injured for half a year and they took his belt away. Yeah, Jon Jones can hold his belt for as long as he wants. You got other champions who don't fight for an entire year. Tony was out for half a year, and he fought on the same card as Khabib versus Conor. That guy fought Anthony Pettis on the same card as the lightweight title fight. The same division. He was the interim champion, but they took it away from him because he was injured, but he was still there to fight. He fought on the same card as them. Imagine you were the interim champion. You get injured while doing media for the company you're fighting for. They strip the interim title from you, then schedule your next fight on the same card as a title fight, but you're not in it. You're fighting as a contender against someone else, knowing that you should be the main event, unifying your title, but you're just there as a contender. They did it for the big money fight, right? Khabib versus Conor. Of course, for business, they're not going to pass up on that. Tony's secondary to that, but Tony should have been fighting for the belt. I remember when he was supposed to fight Dustin Poirier and he was actually supporting Dustin in his negotiations. He wanted Dustin to get more money to fight him. Dustin thanked him, bounced out of the fight, and then fought Conor McGregor later. And Tony never got that Conor fight. But that UFC 229 one, where he fought Anthony Pettis on the same card as the undisputed lightweight title fight, that was such BS to Tony. He saved 2 events for the UFC. He saved 2 pay-per-views for the UFC. The one against Kevin Lee, he stayed in the fight, fought Kevin Lee for the interim title, saved the event. Then he did the same thing against Justin Gaethje. He didn't need to fight Gaethje. He could have just waited for Khabib. Not only did the first time the fight fall apart, but then he wanted to fight him the second time. He wanted to put on the event during COVID, so people had a fight to watch. Massive success, 700,000 pay-per-view buys, and he lost the fight. Then you got guys like Jon Jones, who pulls out, destroys the entire UFC 151 card. The only time a pay-per-view card was canceled entirely was because of Jon Jones. Tested positive multiple times for steroids. They moved an entire event for him. Remember that time when they said that they will never have Jon Jones ever headline a pay-per-view again? That was funny. And look what they did to Tony, who saved events, supporting his opponents to make more money, fought for interim titles twice. And now look what Tony's legacy is going to be. The guy who went on an 8-fight loss streak and never fought Khabib. But yeah, to answer your question, sadly, I don't even think he's going to be remembered with the same respect as BJ Penn had. Look at Ashton Warden. How come everyone is acting like JDM is the biggest threat to Islam and is going to beat him and proclaiming how good he is when 2 fights ago he was literally losing to Gilbert Burns, if not for a last-second KO. But to be fair, against Burns, he was injured in the fight. I think just as an opponent, JDM is the biggest threat to Islam. He's the biggest fighter he's ever fought. He's one of the best strikers in the UFC. He shows such good takedown defense in the Bilal fight, and he's very good at scrambling. Even scrambled out of the position with Gilbert Burns to land that knee and knock him out. Now, I think the reason why he's more difficult than Ilia is mainly because of the size difference. Like, JDM would never be able to fight a featherweight. I don't even think he could make lightweight. JDM is an average welterweight. Ilia is, I guess Ilia is like an average lightweight now, but he's nowhere close to the size of JDM. Skill for skill, Ilia is a better fighter, but JDM has the size that Ilia doesn't. And that's a big aspect of a fight. They're with a DR, who in the history of the lightweight division in their prime would beat current Max Holloway. I would say Ilia Topuria, Islam Makhachev, Khabib, Conor. I think prime Dustin still beats him. The Dustin he just fought was not in his prime at all. He was way over the hill. And I think Arman beats him, and that's it. They would have Jamal Zubi. What adjustments does Max need to make to potentially beat Ilia in a rematch? And how do you raise chances against Tsaruykan? So in the first fight with Ilia, he was sitting on his punches more, and he was standing in front of Ilia more. He fought differently against Dustin. Against Dustin, he was using more elusive footwork to get around, and I think he has to do that against Ilia too. He can't stand in front of him that much. Ending his combinations with a lot more kicks, would be ideal, and throwing in more knees as well. Even if he has to grab into the Muay Thai clinch, using his legs a lot more as an attack, I think helps Max a lot more. And when tall fighters throw knees to the body and knees to the head, it is very effective, as you see from RDR and Dan Hooker before. He is so much taller than Ilia. If he grabs into the Thai clinch, he could defend the hooks from Ilia very well, while landing elbows and knees and stuff. So I think those will be some of the adjustments for Max, but I just don't see him beating Ilia. And honestly, I think Arman's a tougher fight than Ilia is. Arman would be by far the best wrestler he's ever fought. By far. And I just don't see him defending the takedowns. I think Tsaruykan mostly wins that fight off of his attacks from top control. When you look at Max Holloway's career, he actually hasn't fought a lot of good wrestlers. There's only been like a few, and the best one he fought, Volkanovski, he lost because of the wrestling. Whenever Volkanovski implemented a wrestling game plan in his fight with Max, he beat him. He wrestled in both the first and second fight and beat Max. In the third fight, it was all striking from Volk. Like if we look at all of his opponents, he beat Ricardo Lamas. Lamas was a decent wrestler, not really high level. Frankie was out of his prime when they fought, and also a lot smaller than Max. Good wrestler though, very good wrestler. Then Volkanovski. Volkanovski is a good wrestler, but I'm not going to say he's a high level offensive wrestler like Arman is, right? And Volk did win the second fight against him using his wrestling. In the third fight, he didn't even need to use his wrestling. In fact, Max was the one shooting on Volk in their last fight. And then Ilia, who only shot once. Arnold Allen's a decent wrestler. Going from that to fighting Arman Tsaruykan is a very different level, and I just don't think he defends the takedowns. Look at Orisog. If Francis Ngannou came back and beat Tom Aspinall, where would you rank him among the heavyweight greats? He would be the GOAT, greatest of all time. He beat Stipe, Tom Aspinall, Junior Dos Santos, Alistair Overeem, Cyril Gane. In the context of him beating Tom is him not fighting the UFC for years. I think that would leapfrog Ngannou over Stipe. And then Olsen MMA. Now coming off Dustin Poirier's retirement fight, I've seen some people say he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, which is absolutely ridiculous. My question is, what's your criteria whether for a fighter should be inducted inside the Hall of Fame? I think they have to do something extraordinary. I think Dustin should be in the Hall of Fame for the level of competition that he fought. He's one of the greatest lightweights of all time. He's the best fighter to never win the undisputed belt. He's had some big fights with Conor McGregor and Khabib. I think Dustin's like an overall good candidate for Hall of Fame, where he didn't do something specifically extraordinary, but everything he did was impressive, right? Like some fighters, they've been champions for a long time. Some fighters have a lot of fights and a lot of wins. Some fighters have insane performances. Like there's something extraordinary about every fighter. With Dustin, everything that he's done, not extraordinary, but impressive, right? So I think in that aspect, Dustin could be in the Hall of Fame. But for the criteria of most fighters, I think fighters like GSP and Demetrius Johnson and Jose Aldo, like the champions who have reigned for a long time, have to be in the Hall of Fame. Pioneers should be in the Hall of Fame, like BJ Penn, Mark Coleman, Royce Gracie, Chuck Liddell's the first star of the UFC, Ronda Rousey, various fighters like that. And then there's fighters like Jim Miller. Most fights, most wins in UFC history. You have to put him in the Hall of Fame. He has the most extraordinary longevity in UFC history. The guy's been winning longer than everybody else. That in itself is a very difficult thing to do. Even fighters like Tony Ferguson, like we talked about before, he was on top of the world. He was one of the best. Then declined to the point that he couldn't even beat Bobby Green. Same with Renan Barão and Johnny Hendricks. They were on top of the world. And then they declined to a point that they couldn't beat anybody. But that never happened in Jim Miller. Jim Miller's had ups and downs his entire career, but is still fighting today in the UFC. I remember when Daniel Cormier was saying that Jim Miller should not be in it, but it's like, dude, if you fought and won for that long in the UFC without retiring, without getting cut or going on some insane loss streak, where that's happened to legends of the sport, Jim Miller's longevity, perseverance, and endurance through his career is absolutely extraordinary. He should be in the Hall of Fame. Then Charles Oliveira, not only because one of the biggest stars in his prime, one of the greatest lightweights, and had a fantastic career, but just off the fact that he has the most finishes in UFC history, should put him in the Hall of Fame. He's going to be in it regardless, right? Now, Donald Cerrone's in the Hall of Fame. With him, I'm starting to think doesn't make as much sense. I guess it's because of the bonuses, but that's very arbitrary. The UFC gives bonuses. It's not an objective, concrete statistic. Like Jim Miller fought more than everybody else. We know that for a fact. That is without anyone's opinion or subjectivity. That is an objective fact. Donald Cerrone getting bonuses is just off of what the UFC felt like, right? Is that the main reason he's in the Hall of Fame? So I think Donald Cerrone's the one I would disagree with the most being in the Hall of Fame. Like you have to do something that's extraordinary compared to the other fighters. You have to win the most, you have to finish the most, you have to have the most knockouts, you have to be a long-reigning champion, whatever it is. That would be my criteria. Then with a Southside Gaming, I've seen some questions float around and would like your opinion on which combat sport requires more stamina, boxing or MMA. Love your channel and keep it up, bro. Thank you so much, man. Now, what requires more stamina? I think it depends on the athlete. I think a wrestler is going to have better cardio for MMA than boxing. Like someone who's wrestled their entire lives, they're going to have better cardio for MMA. But I think if you grabbed a random person, put him inside a 12-round boxing match or a 5-round MMA fight, I think they would gas out more in MMA. Every position in MMA is exhausting. I think the striking in boxing is more tiring, but MMA has wrestling, has the clinch. Dude, do you know how exhausting it is to be pushed up against the fence and getting punched to the body the way RDR did to Whitaker? It is so exhausting to defend against that position. The clinch itself looks very boring to watch and stuff, but when you've been in that clinch before, you know how tiring it is. Then with all the takedowns and sprawling to defend them, throwing in whizzers and try to reverse and get off on the bottom from side control or half guard. Like, I think MMA requires more stamina for the average person. In boxing though, you do throw a lot of punches though. But clinches in boxing, they get broken up every like 5 seconds. In MMA, clinches can last for like 3 minutes. Getting knee to the body feels very different too than getting punched to the body. Generally, taking calf kicks now, you can't even walk the same. You gotta use more energy to just move around. I think MMA requires more stamina for the average person. Then we go to fight lore. Do you think we will eventually see Usman Nurmagomedov in the UFC? And how does he match up against the top 15? I do see him eventually in the UFC. So in the UFC, I think he beats Yoel Alvarez, Grant Dawson, BSD, Chandler, Moicano, Fiziev, Pimblett, Dariush, Gamrot, Hooker, Gaethje. Then I think he has a tough fight with Max, but I think he wins. Now I would say he beats Oliveira, especially after that knockout loss to Ilia. He loses to Arman, loses to Islam, and loses to Ilia. And then final question, we're going to go to Felipe Araújo. Which fighter would benefit the most by being undefeated? Example, if RDA was undefeated, he would have wins over Usman, Edwards, and Khabib. Chael Sonnen would have wins over Silva, Jones, and Fedor, etc. I think it's easily RDA. If RDA won all of his fights, he would literally be the greatest of all time, as he has fought up against the most difficult competition in UFC history. Like, look at the wins he would have. Cerrone twice, Khabib, Benson Henderson, Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, Tony Ferguson, Robbie Lawler, Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman, Kevin Lee, Leon Edwards, Paul Felder, Renato Moicano, Rafael Fiziev, Vicente Luque, Mateusz Gamrot, and Jeff Neal. That is the GOAT right there, man. It's crazy. The guys that Rafael Dos Anjos fought. And then we'll go to Steven. People joke about it all the time, but what are your thoughts on plot armor in the UFC? More specifically, how far do you see RDR going in middleweight? Also, love the breakdowns and shout out Usyk. Absolute best heavyweight in the world. I was thinking about like, where does he rank amongst the greatest heavyweights of all time? Did he beat the same level of fighters that Ali beat? Probably not, but he's been so dominant that there really isn't an opponent for him to fight other than Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker is good, but I don't think anything elevates Usyk at this point. He's beaten everybody he needs to beat, and he's done it multiple times. And that is not plot armor. What we see in MMA is plot armor. That middleweight division is like a comic book. It's so wild that Dricus du Plessis and Reinier de Ridder are two of the best fighters in this division. After all the technical strikers and amazing grapplers we've seen, these two guys like flip everything we know about fighting on its head. Bro, they are that uncle who swears he could beat up UFC fighters. These two are really that guy. No, jokes aside, like, they're actually good, but have very unconventional fighting styles. Now, plot armor is mostly memes and stuff. It's not a real thing, obviously, unless you think it's like some kind of divine intervention or fate. These two guys reach the top, means their ability to game plan and fight IQ are better than the other fighters, while also being carried by their physical attributes. Both of these guys are huge for this division. They're very strong and tough, right? These two guys show why size, strength, chin, and durability matters in a fight. And when you have the fight IQ that these two have, they don't need to be the most technical in the world to become the best fighters in their weight class. Also to note, they are both well-rounded. The middleweights generally are not well-rounded fighters, ever since the Weidman and Rockhold era, right? Starting from the Bisping era onward, it's been mostly strikers, and these two can strike and they can grapple, while also being bigger than everybody else. So that's what I think it is. I think it's them being well-rounded, they have the attributes, and they're both actually intelligent fighters. And how far does Reinier de Ridder go in the middleweight division? The furthest he goes, in my opinion, is fighting for the belt. I think that's his peak. Generally, like throughout his career, he's probably going to stay in the top 7. And the last question, we go to Tyrone Winter. Fantasy matchups, Battle of the Washed Edition. All fighters in their current state right now. Tony Ferguson versus Guram Kutladze. I'll go with Guram. Colby Covington versus Gilbert Burns. I'll go with Burns. Paul Craig versus Jan Blachowicz. I'll go with Blachowicz. Bobby Green versus Michael Chandler. I'll go with Chandler. You know what? No, I'm not going to Chandler. I'm never picking Chandler again. Rob Font versus Dominic Cruz. I'll go with Rob Font. Dillashaw versus Cejudo 2 at bantamweight. Definitely Cejudo. Well, I don't think Dillashaw can make bantamweight right now. The guy's pretty jacked, but if they fought at bantamweight right now, I'd say Cejudo beats him again. And that is ultimately the end of the episode, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And make sure to give the video a like. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. And I'll see you guys in the next video.